Kenwood was always part of my upbringing. My dad has obviously worked here, my sister has worked here, so it was always a product that we knew or a brand that I knew when I was growing up at home.
Both my mother and my grandmother had a Kenwood chef. My mother still has a Kenwood chef that she uses today.
The Kenwood chef has always been the ultimate wedding gift, and people also have memories when they were children of their granny using a Kenwood chef to make cakes. So it's a product that's associated with lots of happy memories, which is a wonderful thing.
The Kenwood story began when Kenneth Wood, along with business partner Roger Lawrence, designed, built and launched a food mixer in 1947, which became known as the A200 Kenwood mixer.
So at this point, the company was called Woodlaw Industries because that was the combination of Ken's and Roger Lawrence's surname. But then, for some reason, Roger decided to leave, and Ken was left alone running the business, so he changed the name to Kenwood, and the rest is history.
The Kenwood chef was launched at the 1950 Ideal Home exhibition. The success of the chef and other supporting products made Kenneth Wood a millionaire before he was 40 years old in 1956.
Kenwood totally believed that demonstration was the way to sales, because he pointed out that no one had really seen these machines before, and if they saw one in the window, shop window, it's just this, what is that thing and how does it work? No idea, and they wouldn't even buy it. But if they saw somebody actually using it and demonstrating it, then they would really want to buy it. And Ken's saying was, eye appeal is buy appeal, and that's exactly the way it sold.
The Woking office was a rather old building.
The design office was really like a long prefab, but very hot in the summer and pretty cold in the winter. But that was in the late 50s, so I'm not surprised.
The atmosphere at Kenwood really was the fact that we were all so close. Two sides of the street, very narrow street, but I think the majority of the supervisors and foremen were quite close to their workers, and I've never known anywhere before in my working life of the comradeship between people, purely because of the nearness and the closeness.
It had a huge family atmosphere, and Ken was the father of all the staff, basically, and he knew them all really well personally.
Well, I describe Kenneth Wood as a one-off. He was always coming round and having a chat with everybody, plus the fact you could see him quite a few times during the week, and the other directors as well. Quite important, I thought, in a company, and I've never experienced it before, and I've never really experienced it since.
My working with Kenwood started with my being totally ignorant of what they did. I was part of a group of designers who'd been sent to Kenwood from the Design Council, whose job was to match designers, they were like brokers, with anybody in commerce who wanted a designer. Well, on this particular day I turned up at this fairly grubby factory in Woking, and there were two men in the room, and me, and there wasn't much room for anything else. And one of them was the owner, this fellow called Kenneth Wood, and larger than life and quite smartly dressed, and great character, but slightly daunting. Later on you realise a real sort of salesman, but a perfect man to meet. They showed me a product they were already making, which is this kitchen mixer. And I probably didn't have much idea of what such things did even. We certainly didn't have one at home, and we didn't know anybody in my family who'd got such a thing. They were just at the point of re-engineering it and setting it up for mass production. And so whatever decisions they were making at that time were all about being prepared for a serious long production cycle for this product, which was a rebirth of the one that they'd already got into the market successfully with.
Ken is aware that times have changed and it's looking a bit old-fashioned, a bit clunky, and he realised that to keep sales going he needed to redesign it, and he wasn't a designer, so he needed to hire one.
The functional parts weren't going to be much altered, they just needed a new suit of clothes. easily said, but quite a complicated thing to achieve. I was obligated to make a model, and I set about the design, which meant the drawings, etc., and thinking about the construction, etc. The first couple of days it was like a regular 12-hour working day, but when you get to day 3 and then day 4, you're really up to the wire. And I just ran out of time. There's no artifice in the eventual presentation, which was half a model. I took exactly half of the model.
And the way to make it look like a whole one is he stuck it on a mirror. And Kenwood thought that was wonderful. It intrigued him, and he chose him because of that.
I came to realise that one of the reasons he liked it was because he liked the cheek of going to him with half of what he expected.
The new model was a great success, becoming a kitchen appliance icon. It remained in production until 1976.
Come 1962, they were bursting at the seams, and they couldn't function anymore in Hipley Street. So they needed bigger premises to meet the demand. So down in Havant, they built a new factory, I don't know, probably 10 times bigger or more.
Well, the first idea I got the move was obviously a rumour, which every factory happens. We all disbelieved it for a while, but then we then heard that he'd actually got a factory down here and was going to make the fridges and the dishmasters.
And there was one famous year when we had a blindingly hot summertime, and Kenneth Wood, with his hat on for the future, did a deal and imported some Canadian refrigerators, labelled them Kenwood, and he was entering the market of what we call the white goods, that it warranted the building of a completely different factory, which being a very big site needed compared to Woking, probably 10 or 20 times as big, a massive site with very tall buildings, because these big white boxes of tin get shunted around and need space.
I got a transfer to Havant because I really fancied living on the south coast because of my interest in sailing, which suited me great because I got in at the ground floor of at Havant then.
I wasn't all that keen at first. Family, a daughter was sitting nearly ready for the 11 plus, so it was a bit of a dodgy time, but I was promised that there was a good job down there, and he was keen. He wanted a young staff to keep going. My wife said that we could move down here as long as we had a car and a telephone. So I took the chance and came down.
I got to Havant, where we were in this building, very similar to the Thorn office at Woking and Hipley Street, really, a little bit bigger, and the development and design was being done there, whilst the factory was being built sort of 50, 100 yards away on the same side. The New Lane factory was great, really. It was up to current designs, and it was huge with nice lines, automatic lines laid out, and everything much more modern and much safer too.
It was huge. They had a big workshop. In fact, I should imagine nearly that best part of Hipley Street could nearly sit into the first plant that they put up. There was another section built onto it. And so they were virtually all in one shed, not stretched across the other side of the road, so if it was pouring in rain you didn't get wet moving stuff across. And it was a nice setup.
But it was a good move because they were starting on refrigeration. I knew they were doing that, and that was the up-and-coming thing in this country in the early 60s. It was a bit unfortunate that every other domestic appliance manufacturer had the same idea, and the market got flooded, and we dipped out.
He got into money troubles. He overspent, and particularly set back by the next 3 summers, all which were brutally cold, and by which time he got the factory established in Havant, and was rescued by a very good relationship with a merchant bank.
A lot of the employees that were experts in refrigeration had to move on, and it was a pretty sad time losing the people you're working with. But luckily, for some reason, they decided I was probably the cheapest and the lowest wage, and I was kept. And from then, everything went smoothly then.
Everything was then up for grabs, so he could build better conditions for the workers and for himself, etc., etc. And it was all a much bigger scale of enterprise and better life for everybody in sight. He must have known that he had a fundamentally good relationship with his workforce, but there was a chance for him to build on that, and he built a social club which became their pub.
We were lucky enough to take over the old labour exchange at Havant. I was one of the committee on then, and it brought together both the Havant and the working people.
I felt that when I first joined Kenwood, I was part of a big family. They had a football team, they had a bowls team, darts team. The social club was very active.
Ken strongly believed in giving the staff a good time, and every summer he would have a summer outing for them all part of the family atmosphere. But in 1968 it was different because it was the 21st anniversary of the whole company. And that night they had a huge party, and Ken was presented with lots of gifts, surprise gifts, one of which was a key, it looked like a key to the city, that was manufactured by the staff.
In this long and colourful history of Kenwood, and therefore Kenneth, was the time when he sold out. And you have to realise that in common with other things at the time, this was quite unusual.
Now, come just after the celebrations, Sir Jules Thorn, who ran this huge corporation, and he was in buying mode at the time, and he had Kenwood in his sights, and Ken didn't want to lose his dream and lose his company, but he couldn't stop the takeover. So he had to finally tell the staff exactly what had happened. So they rigged up a microphone PA system on the factory floor, and he had to tell them the news that he had to go, and they'll be okay, and they've got a great future. It's best for him, best for the staff, best for the customers and for the company, but he couldn't work there anymore. And then he went to the loos and cried his heart out. The saddest thing.
I think we were dumbfounded, the factory, that it happened and that he'd gone. Now, as far as I'm concerned, Kenwood was Kenwood in more ways than one.
Ken was absolutely gutted to have lost his baby, because I remember I was 8 years old that day when he actually left the company, and he was crying, and it was really sad. And it did take him a while, I'd say about a year actually, to get over it.
We were suddenly invaded by a lot of what I would class as grey-suited managers. Not many on the shop floor. In fact, I don't think anybody came down from Thorn that went on the shop floor.
Thorn Electrical Industries purchased Kenwood in 1968. At this point, Kenwood employed 1,800 workers in the UK and 400 overseas.
After Kenwood had sold the company to Thorn EMI, it opened us up to a lot more domestic appliance opportunities, really.
We were pretty horrified when they wanted to change the name of the Kenwood products to Thorn, because we couldn't see any advantage at all. Kenwood was a good product, say what you like, it might have been expensive, but it was a good product and it was valued all over the world, and why would they want to change it? Fortunately, although we spent a bit of time and money badge engineering it in that manner, somebody saw the light and they changed their minds, and we reverted back to Kenwood, and that was great news.
Kenneth Grange was very important because he had unusual ideas, I would say, things that did stand out.
Kenneth Grange was almost one of my heroes. He was a very modest guy, and what I liked about him most of the time was we went to meetings which was full of very senior people from all departments, and oftentimes people couldn't understand what was being said, and Ken would be the one that say, "Can you explain that?" And nobody else understood it either, but he was the only one to admit to it, and he was great like that.
I joined Kenneth Grange at Pentagram on graduating from Design Uni in London. So that was back in the early 1970s. So I started working in the workshop as a model maker, one of the many skills that you're actually taught at university, and progressed from there into the design office.
Johan, who still working for Kenwood as we sit here today, he started life as a delivery boy, the life that I knew anyway, He turned up one day delivering some goods to the workshop here in my office, and we were running like crazy on something, and he took the goods, whatever it was he was supplying, paint or bits of perspex or something, up to the workshop and never came down. I think they asked him to hold the end of a bit of wood and he just never escaped. So he came to work for me, and he'd been trained, he'd had a good education at the Central School, I think, as a designer, but no experience at all, of course. So he was with me for a very long time, I don't know, 10, 15 years or something, gradually working his way up in terms of talent and responsibility.
The influence Kenneth's had on me was, I guess, from sort of day one. He's always been somebody who was looking forward. I mean, he has a reputation for sort of modernising design within Britain. It's those attributes that actually you tend to find that the work that you produce becomes classic.
Oh, the design office before CAD, the drawing was only a means of giving information to people to make it. You could have drawn them freehand, but you can't get the scale right. And the most important thing was that it was easy to manufacture.
The women on the production line were a good barometer for how well we designed something, because if we'd done our job well and designed it so that it went together easily, we could go down on the production line and be fairly sure that we'd get a good reception. But if the girls or the ladies had decided that you hadn't done a good job for them and they were having difficulty in putting things together, then they'd soon let you know. And if I'm honest, I was probably more scared of them than I was my boss in the office.
It was mainly women, girls from the age of 15 upwards, but right up until retirement age, which at that time was 60, and you went dead on the 60. But everybody seemed to mix together. I mean, you socialised as a group, doesn't matter what your age was, and it was good fun. There were a few lads, like they did the labouring and the stores and warehouses, but it was mainly you worked with women and girls.
One area of the factory was notorious for being a dangerous place for a man to tread. It was effectively the kettle line, and in that area there was not a single male operative. So basically, whenever you went up there as a young lad, there was a certain amount of joshing going on. Today it would be called sexual harassment.
When the youngsters, the young lads, you could imagine they came down one or two, depending on the job they were doing, and confronted by a line full of 50 women. There was a lot of ribbing, a lot of catcalling and things. It was quite funny, and they used to be so embarrassed. They wanted to die. You could see it in their faces.
When I first started here, the conditions were quite different. The biggest difference from today really is the clocking in and clocking out system. Certainly if you were like 3 minutes late, you lose a quarter of an hour's play. If the obvious trick was that you get your friend to clock you in and out, that was actually a sackable offence. So it was things were taken quite seriously.
I was surprised how hierarchical the factory was, with lots of levels of management, and also surprised to see that the factory nearly made everything. The raw materials came in one end and the finished products came out the other. All the people on the production lines were women, and all the managers and engineers were men. It was very split.
I think there were a number of things that produced a them and us situation.
There were two separate entities to the canteen. One was the general canteen area where you actually walked up and got served. The other was more of a restaurant where you could go in and you could order and it would be waitress served. Most of the management would eat in the restaurant, of course, but it wasn't restricted to that.
The management canteen was often used almost weekly for entertaining foreign visitors. It cut down the amount of time it was necessary to take people out for meals, and in some respects it was a good idea, but it was always viewed at being the hierarchy.
In the summer, it was baking, absolutely baking, because there were no windows in most places where they could open them, and it used to get so hot. They used to bring round squash, orange squash, it was sort of lukewarm, in dustbins, clean dustbins, and just give you a cup of lukewarm orange squash every day. Yeah, it was so hot, it was uncomfortable. And how we worked, I don't know.
We had a first aider on the site who was called the nurse, and one in particular was called the discipline nurse. If you went in there with a mild headache, you got an aspirin. If you went in there and you had to gash from here to here, you got a discipline.
We had a social club, and it was just across the railway gates, into still a New Lane, but only just. Anyone could become a member. You just signed up a form, went to the social club office and signed a form. They took the subscriptions from your salary before you got it. It was great, it was really cheap. Compared to the pub prices, it was just over half price. And used to get very, very well supported most of the time. It went through a few lean times over the years, but yeah, it was very good, very well supported.
The social club bar, certainly at the time that we're talking about, was very, very reasonably priced. It was subsidised very well, and particularly I remember as a whisky drinker getting 4 whiskies for £1, which made me very, very happy.
I used to play in the darts team, and I used to go down there on my bike, cycle down there and have a shandy and a hot dog. There was a lady there who served food at lunchtime, and practice my darts and then cycle back to work. And then we used to have some sort of entertainment most Saturdays. We did a couple of German nights. We used to get the Umpire band in, and when it was like VE Day and things like that, we had everybody dressing up in the costume. Just all sorts of things like that, really.
One of the highlights of this was a yearly coach trip to either Brighton, Bournemouth or London. And at the time I joined, it was anything up to 5 to 7 coaches that would take all the staff to any of these venues where we would eat, drink and dance. And of course it was done during working time and very, very well attended.
Some of us engineers were quite scared to get on the buses because we could see the ladies swigging out of gin bottles, which were thrown out before we even left Havant.
At the outing, or on the way to the outing, we would probably start drinking on the coach. And people would be quite cheerful by the time they got there. And then of course you had the day in the town where people would probably go to a pub and have another few jars. So by the evening, people were really quite merry.
On one outing into Bournemouth we went, and it was a scorching hot day, and I had these brand new outfit on, new Falmer jeans and top, and they were costing me more than a week's wages. And somehow I got picked up and thrown into the sea, and then the lads all went in their clothes and got sopping wet, and one lad took his underpants off and put them on his head to dry them off, ready for the evening. It was just stupid things, you know, it was really good fun, really. From what I remember, we actually got changed in the venue because it was equipped for that sort of thing. So all the girls, we got our long frocks out and got changed, and then went into the main sort of ballroom part of the venue, ready for the evening's entertainment, I suppose. We had a meal. We were all sitting in sort of big tables. We had there was dancing, and then there was somebody that came on a microphone on the stage and said, right, we're now going to hold the Miss Kenwood competition. So I was sort of like, oh, okay. And a few of the girls that were on my table, they said, oh, why don't you go in for it? I said, oh, no, I can't, because I didn't want to put myself out there. I was just too embarrassed. And they said, no, you should. And a few of the others, I said, well, I will if you will. So it was basically, we were cajoling each other into doing it. And that's how it came about. I went up and said, oh, yes, I'll put my name forward. And that's what was done. That's how we did it. I suppose you'd call it like a beauty pageant. Very sexist in today's environment, but back in the early 70s, it wasn't. Because Miss World was still on the television, and so it wasn't. So we'd all stand in line, ready to be called onto the stage to be not interviewed, but we'd have a chat. How long have you been working at Kenwood's? What have you done during the day? And then the judges would be sitting at a table, very Miss Worldy, making notes, and then we'd go off, and then the next girl would come on, and that's how it went until we'd all been interviewed.
Usually judged by lecturers, directors. But it was good, and it was a good bit of fun, and unfortunately we don't see that sort of thing nowadays, but a sad loss, I think.
I was absolutely petrified, so nervous. I'd never done anything like that in my life. And then it was, well, in third place, so-and-so, in second place, so-and-so, and in first place, Jane Eddowes, as I was then. And it's sort of, it took a moment for it to sink in. I heard him, but I didn't really hear him. Do you know what I mean? It was like, oh, Miss Kenwood, 1973, Jane Eddowes. And everybody started to clap, and even the girls that had taken part, it was such fun, and they were all, we were all friends. Another part of winning the Miss Kenwood is they wanted to do, I think it was sort of like promotional photographs. I don't know what for, but I was told to bring in the dress and the necklace that I wore when I won it, and obviously the sash, and which is what I did. So they took me, the photographer took me into an office, and I had to sort of sit on a chair and do a bit of posing, and also in my day wear as well, which they did. So I had to sort of be on a desk and answering a phone. So yeah, it was all good fun. I thoroughly enjoyed it, actually. Really enjoyed it.
Within the activities of the club, we did one year have a raft race, and the idea was to build a raft, and for the raft to contain 2 people from each of the departments within Kenwood. We delegated the volunteers to join, and we built the raft over in the Kenwood car park. But to house 36 people, it had to be rather large and really, really heavy. But with the support of many of our suppliers, we were able to get it lifted, put onto a low loader, delivered to Southsea, and help in launching it. The race itself was absolutely brilliant, and many of the people that took part still talk about it to this day.
Initially that was the brainchild of Melvin Davis, and it was, I think initially it was to just take part in local raft races, and then probably Melvin again had the bright idea that we could paddle the thing across the channel. Unluckily, there were 13 of us, on 12 paddlers and the captain, Ian White. And we did actually go from Dover to Calais, which we say is a world record because nobody had done it or has done it since, but we didn't manage to get that confirmed. The raft was called the Kenwood, which was a Chinese water torture. And the raft was made out of drums, oil drums. And we raised over £1,000 for the hospice, Rowan's.
For quite a number of years, there was actually a night shift running at the factory, and it wasn't unusual for people who were coming in on night shift to come directly from the Kenwood Club. Certainly when you're operating machines which were effectively capable of putting 50 tons of force out, it wasn't possibly the safest environment.
Havant was by now the headquarters of Thorn's domestic appliance division and continued to develop new products.
Products were marketed in two distinct divisions. One was the UK home sales and the other was the export market. We serviced as exporter something like about 89, 90 countries, and of these some were subsidiary companies of Kenwood and others were distributors, but all required training both in service and in marketing and in sales, and of course they required demonstrators. We had quite a sophisticated school in Kenwood where they would either send people over to be trained, or alternatively myself and many others would go abroad and actually train them on site over there. Within the service department we set up a shop, and this was really to sell to the staff any products that had slight blemishes that you could not sell as being a first-class product. And of course this became very handy for many of the people that worked in the factory. Suddenly outlet stores were being introduced across the country, and we considered, why not have an outlet store here? And this of course progressed over the years to where it is today, which is a beautiful, shiny, all singing, all dancing factory shop.
Thorn EMI was a large conglomerate. In the 80s, they started to get rid of a lot of their businesses. Tim Parker joined us in the latter part of the 1980s, or the mid-80s, and when Thorn EMI decided to get rid of Kenwood, Tim put forward the plan that we could try and buy the company from Thorn EMI. And so we started thinking about doing a management buyout. It was a complicated sale because Kenwood had lots of overseas subsidiaries. It had lots of patents. It had contracts with the Kenwood Corporation of Japan. And during the management buyout, we had to spend a day in London signing documents, waiting for faxes, waiting for lawyers to come back with their approval. And at the end of it, someone wrote out a cheque for £30 million, which we had to rush round to the bank and pay it in before the close of day. It was a bittersweet moment. We were celebrating because we had bought the company, but also we had to, as directors, do the difficult job of making some people redundant, so that we could actually move on to the stage of making the whole company viable.
I can remember Tim Parker coming and after the management buyout, and he gave a speech in the stores telling us what a wonderful, brave new world he was going to create. And on that same day, I'm sure as I can be, it was that same day, I received my notice and I was told I was redundant. And I ended up walking out the gate on the same day that this brave new world was going to start.
A number of redundancies had to be made because the competition was pretty severe right throughout the country in domestic appliance field. And again, I expected to be released, as they say, but for some reason or another I managed to hang on. I think the other guys, some of them had got company cars and I hadn't, and they went.
The chap who was in charge of the office at the time, the whole of the office, and he came across and saw me on a Saturday night and told me that after 35 years I was made redundant. If I had a cat, I would have kicked it, but couldn't believe it. There's no price of loyalty anywhere. That is really a kick in the teeth.
We had a plan to invest in new products, and we had some ideas to bring to market. The other thing we wanted to do, or certainly I wanted to do in engineering, was move into computer-aided design so that we could actually move from having a concept of a product to getting in production as soon as possible. An important part of Kenwood's products was the industrial design. That is the outside appearance, the styling, if you wish, of the product. The traditional way of doing that would be to make a model. We used Pentagram of Kenneth Grange to do this. But once we moved into computer-aided design, we couldn't have a separate model. We had to have that design done in-house. We had to have the surfaces so we could build on to make the actual product. So we started off our own design house in Kenwood, and to do that we employed Johan Santa, who did work for Kenneth Grange at Pentagram.
I agreed with Kenwood that it was time for them to have their own design office because the volume of work was so great, and it was like a perfect arrangement that he'd leave me and go to work for Kenwood, and he's still there, and he doesn't have to hold the end of the wood anymore.
The real opportunity was to actually expand on the breadth of those product ranges, etc. You know, with the growth opportunities that Kenwood were looking to expand into. So that was, a new challenge, if you like.
In the late 80s, we started to buy some products from Hong Kong, but gradually China was starting to open up, and the Hong Kong manufacturers were moving their factories from Hong Kong into China. And I could see that manufacturing in China was going to be a great opportunity for the future. We first started manufacturing products in China which were complementary products to the ones we made in Havant. But as time went on, we knew that we had to move things to China.
Because our competitors, Bosch, Braun, Mulinex, were already in the Far East using the cheaper labour and sourcing the cheaper raw materials. We had to follow suit, really.
The benefit of China wasn't just in labour costs, although most people think that is the reason. It was also that we could actually tool up products a lot quicker and a lot cheaper. To tool up a typical appliance in the UK would cost, say, £200,000, but in China we could do it for £30,000. This meant that we could have more products, we could have more goes and see successful products than what we could get away with in the UK.
I joined at a time the company was going through a real significant transition period. The decision had been made at the time that we would be looking to manufacture not in Havant anymore, but looking to manufacture in China.
We all wanted to keep production in the UK. We wanted Kenwood to remain a British company. We wanted to be in control of our own destiny. But products coming out of China competing with us were much, much cheaper. So we had to do something.
In 1999, the company announced it was closing its manufacturing plant in Havant and moving almost all production to China.
The evening news were camped outside of the main gate in New Lane, interviewing the people as they were coming out.
It was a pretty horrible time. We weren't just employing people, we were employing families, and this resulted in whole families being made redundant. It was probably one of the saddest periods of my life.
It was a wrench for a lot of people. Really, I never ever thought I'd work in a factory, and I certainly never thought I'd stay there for 31 years. But when you went to Kenwood, it sort of got you in its clutches and you didn't want to go.
It was disappointing that we had to make a lot of people redundant at Havant. But if we hadn't done that, then Kenwood wouldn't have existed today.
I was unfortunately notorious for having closed the club. Somebody had to take the blame. It happened to be me. I boarded the club up. It was a very sad thing to do, but it had to be done because it just was a complete loss maker. Unfortunately, the effect of this was catastrophic as far as the workforce was concerned, and there was almost a rebellion in that they wanted their sports and social club. The manufacturing director at that time then took it on himself, and with a team in the factory decided to reopen the club and make it work. It worked for a period of time, but eventually it ended up in the same place that I was at, and it ended up being closed again.
To move all our production to China, we had to use a lot of money. Kenwood had a lot of cash flow issues during the late 90s to move from producing products in the UK to producing products in China. And I dare say DeLonghi saw an opportunity and decided that they would look at buying the company.
Obviously, I think one of the catalysts for success was the acquisition by DeLonghi in 2001. And I think at the time, the company was in a very difficult phase. Firstly, it took away that financial burden, which allowed the people here to focus on developing the brand. Secondly, because DeLonghi had a global footprint, we were able to leverage that global footprint.
I think DeLonghi were quite lucky or opportune in their purchase of Kenwood, because a lot of the hard work in moving production from the UK to China, investing in new products, in streamlining our processes, in building up our factory in China was done, and they were able to take advantage of all what we had done.
There is a very strong continuum between actually the founder, Kenneth Wood, etc., and his vision, if you like, and what he was looking to achieve. Equally, the management buyout, they had equal ambitions, if you like, in terms of growth in the direction that had already been established. Then with the DeLonghi buyout and the DeLonghi family, their history is actually not so dissimilar from Kenneth Wood's. Giuseppe DeLonghi is established and grew a company, a brand, equally if not faster than Kenwood, from a very strong sort of product base and innovation base. So they were real entrepreneurs of their time. So the benefit to Kenwood and to us and to me particularly in that acquisition of Kenwood by DeLonghi is that sort of continuum, and it still exists today.
The product I'm most proud of, I think, is the Chef Titanium, which we launched in 2003. It was the first new chef product, ground up design that had been done for more than 20 years. It was a challenging time when we were seeing a reduction in the kitchen machine sales. We had to build on the chef that Sir Kenneth Grange designed in the early 60s. All of those aspects of timeless contemporary design was what Kenwood was best known for. And I think, if we'd gone a different route, we would have had to have re-established the heritage of Kenwood, and I think it was important to build on that, not to try to reinvent yourself. And I think one of the strengths of the Kenwood brand is around 70 years of continuous innovation. It's evolutionary rather than revolutionary what we do here, but always putting the consumer at the heart of that.
It's been a joy over the years to actually work on such an iconic product and actually sort of keep it up to date. But it is a credit to its original thinking, if you like, that effectively it still exists as a relevant product today.
That product was the turning point for the success that Kenwood has had in the last 15 to 20 years.
One of the nice things about working with Kenwood is that essentially wherever you go in the world, you will always see a Kenwood mixer somewhere.
I like going in the shops now and looking at the mixers that are around, the chefs, and seeing what parts they haven't changed, and you can still see some brackets and little bits that have been there for 40 odd years.
There's thousands of them under the kitchen sink in thousands of homes, and still kept there and still very fondly regarded as part of the history of that family. So that's touched a lot of lives.
It's important to understand the history of our brand and where we've come from and how we've grown. What Kenwood did, it's still in us today.
I think the defining moment of Kenwood is when a child is born. The child was the Kenwood chef, born to Kenneth Wood, and surviving right to this very day.
Obviously, I'm as proud as punch the fact that my stepfather created a worldwide brand, but it is actually his name printed on all these products all over the world and loved and respected. It makes me as proud as anything.
You know, you can go anywhere in the local area and speak to anybody, and they have some kind of family member or a friend that worked here.
And that's why Kenwood is still an integral part of Havant and the Havant community today, as it was when we first came here in the 1960s.
I think I enjoy the work I do now. I do. I'm not taking anything away from that, and I work with some nice people. But there isn't the social side that we had at Kenwood, and I think that enhanced it, the social side, and I really think it is the best job I could have had for all those years. Yeah.